recording for us. There you go. So our meeting is about to start. We ask if you have any questions to please hold them until the end. Unless you have a very burning one, a burning question to ask, Laurie is okay with answering those during the presentation. So I want to acknowledge our friends of OLLI who make these kinds of presentations possible. It's their contributions and their support that really encourage us and supports us in offering these free brown bag presentations. As Jane mentioned earlier, classes are still ongoing. We have classes ongoing until May, and then we have a summer session starting up in July. But I do want to remind folks that we ask that you register for classes no later than 3 days before class day start, just so we have time to register you and get you all the information you need. Of course, if you find out about a class the day before and you want to take it, we will we'll still go ahead and register you for it. But it just makes the process a little bit easier when it's like 3 days before. So as a reminder, the library and a lot of other amenities on campus are now open for OLLI members and community members. So if you haven't been to the library yet, I recommend going in there. There's a lot of new stuff on the third floor. There's some really cool stuff going on up there. OLLI membership, if you're not a member now, I invite you to be a member in the upcoming year. Our memberships do expire at the end of this spring semester. So I recommend if you are going to be a member, go ahead and sign up after this spring session. As a little plug, I host these Let's Connect conversations with Tracy Barnes-Priestley, and she does an amazing job at facilitating the conversation. It's just a really easygoing morning group, and we just talk, and every week we have different topics, and you can stick to them or not. So you can find the information to register for that online. Just before we get started, I do want to acknowledge that the Cal Poly Humboldt is on the land of the Wiyot peoples, and there are still a thriving community who does a lot of work in the surrounding areas, and they are an important group of people to acknowledge and connect with, and an opportunity to learn more with them. Lastly, I want to thank our OLLI volunteers who help us and support us in doing a lot of different things. So thank you. We're always looking for volunteers, so if you're interested, you can send us an email. But other than that, I'm going to pass it off to Jane so she can introduce our instructor today, or our presenter.
Thank you, Alex. And I'm delighted to welcome all of you to this wonderful talk that I know you'll enjoy. I'm going to praise it in advance because I know she's a very good speaker with a wonderful topic. Laurie Wayburn is co-founder and president of Pacific Forest Trust. She's an accomplished forest and conservation innovator who advises policymakers at the state, regional, national, and international levels. She pioneers new approaches to develop sustainable resource economies using her deep experience in the fields of conservation, ecosystem services, and sustainability. A preeminent authority on the climate and ecosystem benefit of forests, she leads efforts enacting climate change and other ecosystem service policies that unite conservation and sustainable management with market-based approaches. Recipient of the Kingsborough Brown Conservation, James Irvine Foundation, and EPA Climate Leadership Awards, she's a frequent speaker, writer, and media commentator on effective incentives for conservation and sustainable resource management. Prior to co-founding Pacific Forest Trust with Constant Best in 1993, she worked internationally for 10 years in the United Nations Environmental Program and Ecological Sciences Division of UNESCO. She later served as executive director of the Point Reyes Bird Observatory and was the founder and first coordinator of the Central California Coast Biosphere Reserve. She's a graduate of Harvard University and currently serves on the Land Trust Alliance Leadership Council. Man, what a bio. Thanks, Laurie. We're happy to have you here.
Well, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here, and thanks everybody for showing up today. I hope you are able to enjoy your lunch while I'm chatting. So, because you've got me at the noon hour, and I don't mind that at all. I'm going to share my screen and just walk through a presentation that talks about the organization writ large, but focuses in on two projects as illustrations of our philosophy and action. And I titled this talk, Putting the Forest Back in Forestry, because fundamental to what we're seeking to do with the Pacific Forest Trust is really transition to managing for whole forests, and not the kind of common wisdom of forestry really being about the production of fiber or timber. And it's kind of stops you up a little bit short when Jane mentioned that we founded this organization 29 years ago, that we did. And so hopefully you'll see that we've made some progress in that. And you'll forgive me if I have a little bit of trouble with this screen. This is a new computer, and I'm seeking to get the advance here.
Usually, it'll probably have you either use the arrows or the space key. Sometimes they'll switch it around.
Let me try the space key. Nope, that's the space key. Here's the arrow. I don't know if you guys can hear that little pop pop in the background, but
Yeah.
got any other advice there?
I would suggest trying to start the slideshow again from the actual program.
Yeah, start over.
So with the screen share.
Or I mean, restarting the slideshow on the, like, what the Windows PowerPoint, like reopening it up there.
All right. Thank you guys for being patient while we figure this out. Okay. I see where it is now. All right, let's try this again. Okay, so
Next line down, go to screen share. Well, whichever.
do you guys see the screen?
Go to
Yeah.
slideshow.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, no, I'll go to slideshow now, but we're gonna. Let's get rid of
And then
that.
play from the start here. All the way to the left, it says play from start. Yeah.
All right, let's see what happens this time. All right. So
There you
Pacific
go.
Forest Trust. Part of what we're about is trying to align landowners' self-interests, which is normally heavily dominated by financial self-interest, with the public's interest. And historically, we only pay landowners for two things that tend to degrade the public interest benefits of forests. We pay them for cutting trees, and we pay them for converting their land into other uses. So fundamental to the Pacific Forest Trust is to develop new sources of financial return for landowners to manage for the public interest or public benefit. And loosely, those are represented here by wildlife, by climate, and by water. And what we've done thus far is develop a new approach to using conservation easements to guide forest management. This is now the national standard. But when we started it, nobody had done it yet, so it was looked at with a bit of doubt. And what that means is that within many conservation easements, even today, all that happens is the banning of subdivision or development. But there's no change in the management of the forest. And what we've done with the working forest conservation easement is actually design it to embed changes into forest management for the long term into the management of the forest. And primarily, initially, these were to benefit habitat because we could generate funding for habitat conservation. That's represented by the fissure there. So that opened up a whole new stream of funding for landowners that paid them for the opportunity cost of managing differently. The second area that we focused in on from a policy perspective was to pay landowners for the climate benefits of their forests. And we started in on this in 1993, so we've been doing it for a while. We were able to successfully get forests included in California's state policy, making California the first state or nation in the world to reward forest landowners for keeping their forests standing, not just planting new forests, and also for growing older forests. And we'll touch upon that with a pilot project shortly. And then the next thing that we have been focused on to reward landowners for is managing for the water services of forests. And if you think about habitat or biodiversity, climate, and water, these are three completely irreplaceable functions of forests that we rely on. If you think about timber and fiber, although they're very valuable, they are replaceable. So in many respects, creating new economies for landowners, frankly, both public and private, to manage for what we cannot replace, but we rely on, is a critically important thing to do. So what have we done? We have led the conservation of about 380,000 acres of forest land so far. We've been able to pass a law that created a carbon market for forest landowners. And we've also been able to pass a law to include watersheds within our state of California's water system. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about two projects that illustrate how we roll that into use. So how we take it from policy into action, and then also to some degree, how we then take the learnings from that action into improving policy. So as you can see, we're really about this symmetry that should exist in an area which has traditionally been very, very conflictual. And that is the symmetry and synergy of conservation and stewardship, along with a sustainable economy. So I wanted to talk about a pilot project that we have. It's not really a pilot project at this point. It's over 20 years old, so it's more than a pilot, but it's right outside of Arcata, which is 2,200 acres of the Van Eck Forest. And we have this conserved under a conservation easement, and we've managed it for coming on 20 years now. As you can see from this slide, it kind of surrounds the town of Fieldbrook, and then it's up by Moonstone. It actually has the headwaters of the watershed for the Moonstone community. Let me just take a second to talk about how we use this conservation easement approach. I mentioned that we use this to guide and direct how forests are managed. And those of you who, and all of you do, live in the Arcata and Eureka area, you see the impact of managing forests for economic return in the short term primarily, because that's what our financial system does, is it focuses on short-term return. So the kind of standard stocking or amount of trees that are in the forests that are industrially managed rarely gets above about 12,000 board foot to the acre on average. Sometimes it's lower than that. So what we've done in the Van Eck is to target the return to a more natural stocking of timber. So that's to go up to 100,000 board foot. So little, just about 10 times what you see on average there. And that it's all to be native species, because those are more naturally resilient, and that's what all the wildlife and plants are adapted to. And we're limiting opening sizes to what would occur under a natural regime. But we harvest annually. And the key difference here is that harvest is a tool for us. It's not the driver. Whereas in the dominant form of so-called forestry, harvest is the driver, and everything else is treated as a byproduct or a concession, shall we say. So we flip that. This is just to give you a sense of how this forest has been evolving. I do need to put in 2022 aerials here, but you can see the impact of historic management in the 4 tracks here that we're just going to walk through. This is a rather unfortunately named creek. When we hope that the state will change the name of this creek over time, but for the moment it's still the Squaw Creek tract. You can see the difference between 2014 and 1948. This is the Moonstone tract that I was mentioning earlier that has the headwaters there. You can see how much more forested it is now. That was once farmed for potatoes, actually. Here's the Lindsay Creek tract, which you drive on when you're driving out the Murray Road. And then this is the Fieldbrook tract. And one of the interesting things is we just bought last year another 80 acres that connects the Squaw Creek tract with the Fieldbrook tract right across the Fieldbrook Road there. So you can see the approach that we're taking to management is more small group openings and individual tree selection. But we do harvest every year. And the goal for that harvest is really illustrated by this stump on the Fieldbrook tract. Fieldbrook, as some of you probably know, was the home of the Fieldbrook giant, which is a tree that made its way around the Cape in South America and was taken over to England to do a tour of England and Europe as the largest tree in the world. And it ended up as a dining table in a castle in England. As you all know, if you walk around in the forest, you see these massive stumps. The redwoods will grow hundreds to thousands of years. Our time frame for what we're harvesting them on is anywhere from 30 to 65 years. You can see it's a tenth to less than that of what these trees can naturally do. So if you're trying to restore this forest to more natural function, this is the challenge you have. How do you take these young, crowded, small stumps and carefully harvest them so that you're restoring a more natural distribution of larger trees? This is one sign of progress. You can see that there's more concentration of the biomass in larger trees as well as smaller trees. Here's another example where you're seeing it even more advanced. And how we're approaching this is, as I say, single tree selection or group selection if we have an unnatural composition, particularly of spruce in the stands. And what we're doing is, while we're removing biomass in these trees that you see with the blue lines that are on the ground, we then let those stands rest for 15 years. And in that time, they reabsorb all the biomass that you see we're taking out, and they pack on more. So it's a really interesting approach. If you were an investor, this is another example that shows even larger trees starting to form in one of the tracts. But as an investor, if any of you have put money away, you really understand compounding interest. And what we're doing is we're taking less out of the forest than what it's growing every year. And so we're building the base of what's in the forest so that it can yield more every year. It's kind of an interesting strategy. But as a result, because we do take out a million plus board foot every year from the forest. So we have loggers in there every year. And we have a wonderful family that we've been working with for the last 8 years or so, the Sargent family, who log on do most of our logging operations. But you can see the growth in stocking that we have overall, even while we're harvesting. And that is this concept of compounding interest, because the trees grow on the stump, they absorb carbon dioxide and grow on the stump as carbon and lumber, and they grow in value. And with inflation, that means you're getting 3 levels of growth there. This is just a chart that kind of says the same things. Net, we've gone from about 20,000 or less board foot to the acre to almost 50 plus, and in some of them we have 75,000. So we have been removing timber every year, but we're increasing. It's a philosophy of appreciation as opposed to depreciation. So we're increasing the total amount of biomass that we can remove every year, even while we're increasing the amount of biomass that is in the stand. And as this slide flags, that gives the landowner money for the timber, but also because this was the first project to be registered under California's carbon offset program as part of the AB 32, and prior to that, the voluntary program. It's also been a significant source of return from the sale of carbon offsets. And in fact, we just had some additional offsets registered last month, mid-month, which we immediately had offers for sale, and the offers are in the area of $17 to $18 a ton. So it's a meaningful amount of money. So the landowner's happy. And in this case, this land is not owned by the Pacific Forest Trust, but it's owned by the Van Eck Forest Foundation. And that money then gets sent to Purdue University. So they're very happy. I want to just take a second for those of you for whom it's not intrinsically obvious, because for most people it is, but we don't stop to think about it on a daily basis. You, however, are forest people living in a forest community, so you may. The vast majority of media that you see about forests and climate is about tree planting. And tree planting is delightful and fun, and I do it myself. But tree planting is not the way to plant our way out of the climate crisis. The way to get out of the climate crisis in the near term is to grow older forests. And I think this slide really illustrates it. When you put a tree in the ground, it absorbs that CO2 around the outer ring of the tree. So it's a little bit in the beginning. And those of you who have seen old growth, you know how massive they are. So the amount of carbon that you're absorbing and putting on the outer ring is huge compared to a little one. The issue is we don't have much old growth. It does grow slow, but it's like, you know, that little tree is $10 in your grandchild's or great grandchild's bank account, and maybe it gets 6% interest. The big old tree might get a 0.5% interest, but it's on $10 million. So we need to be moving our portfolio of forests to older forests. And here's a quick example of what that does. If you look at this slide, this is all about the time value of money fundamentally. And you can see that the lower tree that's on the lower left side, that's representing when we're typically harvesting. Now, this isn't only for redwoods, it's for all of our forests. We're not a patient people. We want our money now. And so that tree for the redwood region might be on average at 45, maybe less for some owners and maybe more for others. But you're not going to get to that maximum amount per year till you're at like 200 plus years of age. So we need to be patient. And for some forests, just moving ourselves out 10 years will make a huge difference. Redwoods are special. They're ones that we should be moving out to 200 years because they store more carbon than any other single forest type in the world. This is just an example of the coverage we got back in the day, 2008, when we did some of these first sales. This is now a multi-billion-dollar industry. And it started with the Van Eck Forest right outside of Arcata, because that was the first one to open up the black box of what did we mean by carbon offsets. So that's on the one side is kind of the economic side to it, and how we've been approaching getting additional return from easements and from carbon as well as timber. But I want to flag something else that we're doing in that forest is that we are pioneering reestablishing the canopy forest. Many of you may know Steve Sillett and his spouse, Marie Antoine. They are working with us to reestablish the canopy vegetation layer. As one of our former board members says, the world that nobody sees, the 8th continent, and that's the continent at the top of old forests. So we are in the process of working with them to reestablish polypodium and vaccinium, so leather ferns and huckleberries, to grow on the tops of trees, where they also will accumulate sediment and they hold water and they become entire systems themselves. And one of the interesting things is they facilitate carbon sequestration. When you can reestablish that upper canopy vegetation layer, it literally can hold about another 20% more moisture in these forests. And so if you think about the long dry summers that we're beginning to have and the scorch events, that's incredibly important. There are a whole series of watershed functions that older forests do that younger forests do not. And this is one of them. So this is kind of cool. And for those of you who are like me, who like to climb, it's really cool because you get to climb up and see what's going on. So this is on the Lindsay Creek, where we done, I guess, 6 or 7 trees last year. We're going to do another 10 this year. There are a variety of creatures who live in the forests in addition to ourselves. This is a young Roosevelt elk. I mentioned the Sargent family. This is one of them here with a child of Augusta. I just like the size of the saw next to Skylar. We have wonderful black bear. We have a couple of wallow places, and we just discovered some sag ponds actually there. And then we also tried on this forest a new policy, which we got enacted, which was to make it easier for landowners who did working forest conservation easements like ours that move forests to older, more natural conditions, that if they had endangered species come, they would simply be encouraged to keep doing what they were doing. It's called a safe harbor agreement. And based on the conservation easement we had, the spotted owl that you see here, we had a pair that was checking out the Van Eck Forest, as our board member, Andrea Tuttle, who many of you know, said was like, hey, it's like the new community being built for spotted owls, come on in. And they were coming on in until the neighbor clear cut, and then they went on out. Then we had barred owls move in, which has also made it awkward, but we're still hoping they'll come back at some point. And then we have a wonderful, we're very proud of our pride of mountain lions that we have here too. So this is just what the tracks looked like in 2021. And you can see that the Fieldbrook area is there, and you can see ours are quite intact forests. And then this is moving forward. So I'm going to turn to a different example, and that's the one about water here. And as I was mentioning earlier, we know that forests are incredibly important for water, period. For those of us living in California, we know that forests are even more important for water because we take water from the North State and we deliver it all the way down into San Diego. So Pacific Forest Trust, in looking at this, was really looking at how do we reward landowners to manage for water. And so we developed a policy which became law, which was that we would recognize forest watersheds as part of our water systems, because our reservoirs won't work very well if their feeders don't work well, and the feeders are the forest. Part of this watershed is the Upper Trinity, and many of you in Humboldt have a real affinity for the Upper Trinity, as well as many of you may have an affinity for the Northern Sierra and the Southern Cascades. But Trinity County, as your neighbor, is pretty near and dear and close and tangible. And the Trinity River is diverted into the Sacramento River, and it's core for the Central Valley project, which is federal, but it's part of the state water system. So we got a law that said these watersheds are part of the water system, and we can invest in them the way we invest in our built infrastructure as well. These are the 5 watersheds that are the core of that system. And I'm going to focus in on the Upper Trinity here. The different colors here just represent the federal lands versus the private lands. And the federal lands are the majority at 62%, with the private lands at 38%. But as often is the case, the private lands are the more productive, contain more water, etc. But we're going to focus in on the Upper Trinity area there, the most westerly of those watersheds. And we're doing a project to acquire roughly 11,000 acres, a little more than that, which is 9% of the Upper Trinity watershed, from a willing landowner that we've worked with before doing conservation easements, but they're willing to sell us the land. And in turn, we are going to then conserve it with a working forest conservation easement with terms appropriate to that forest type. And we're going to convey the underlying land to the Watershed Training and Research Center to be managed for both ecological and community benefits. What this flags here is that this is the source for the Trinity and Lewiston reservoirs, which are the key feeders to the Shasta. The 3 largest reservoirs in California are Oroville, Shasta, and Lewiston. So this is a photograph of the property standing on a wonderfully named pass called the Blue Divide, and standing on the Blue Divide and looking straight across over at Mount Shasta. And then there's another photograph of Mount Shasta, another project actually that we've conserved there, and some wonderful wet meadows there. But that's Picayune Lake, and then you're looking down into the section of the across and over into the project area. And I want to take a second to talk about how and why we're doing this. I think all of us know that we do have a twinned crisis of climate change and biodiversity loss. These are going hand in hand, and one of the reasons they go hand in hand is forest loss and degradation. It's important to recognize that forest loss and degradation accounts for some 42% of the excess CO2 in the atmosphere today. So you could, and it's still another 20% or more that's going into the atmosphere today. If you waved a magic wand and you stopped all fossil fuel emissions, you'd still have all that excess in the atmosphere and you'd be adding to it from forest loss and degradation. And forests are the home and the treasure house of our biodiversity in this country and globally. So one of the things we're seeking to do in our conservation, because we don't have a magic wand and we can't conserve everything everywhere, is highlight those areas that are particularly biodiverse, have a tremendous amount of water, and are likely to stay that way in climate change. And you see here in this group of pixelated images, apologies for the pixelation, but each of those hexagons represents 25 acres. And it's a climate model that we've done to say, how are these lands changing over time? So if you look at the current one, you can see that the dark green stuff is that I feel the most certainty that it'll still be like it is today. And if you look in 2099, you'll see that the conditions are that it will persist. And that's incredibly important because it means that as we're investing our conservation dollars, they're going to have a return. And that's kind of the core of what we're looking at here, is because while we would like there to be all the money in the world to do what we need to do for climate change and for conservation, for biodiversity, we don't. So we have to prioritize. This is a map which I realize that it could kind of look like a disease blotch, but it isn't. It's those same watersheds, and it's looking at how they will change over time. So if we look at the Trinity all the way again on the left, you can see it's in that blue and green, light green, dark green, and blue. It remains that way. Where you see red, it means it's going to be changing. It's virtually certain it's going to change to something that it is not today. And this was mapping that we did to show that wildlife would have a place to go. This is at 2100. And what you see here is this expansion of red, which means that the areas that are in red are unlikely to be livable for either the vegetation or the animals that are there today. But you can see where it's still green, it's over in the Trinity. So the Trinity is very high in terms of the value for conservation. And so what we have here is looking at the ability to do conservation on the ground, promote restoration management that restores older forests that all that biodiversity depend on, increase carbon stores within there, and know that it will endure. And that's what that Trinity project really also represents for us. There are 232 vertebrate species there, 23 of them are rare, 5 are endemic. Those of you who, I like bats. The Townsend's big-eared bat is a wonderful creature that's at risk. This is the cascade frog and the willow flycatcher. It's also botanically very diverse. The other part of our strategy with this is, as we know, this is part of the checkerboarded world where we gave away every other section to the railroads, and then those became private property and most of them went into timber companies. That Trinity watershed will be blocking up between the public and the private to have it be protected in that upper watershed area. I'm going to skip over this one. It's just about data on change there. But as we're coming into a close here, and hopefully there'll be some good questions, many of you will have seen the new UN report that just came out. One of the themes that you no doubt heard about from Andy Tuttle when she was speaking with you all a couple of weeks ago was that at Glasgow, the absolutely critical need to combine adaptation and mitigation together. So that absorbing CO2 alone is not enough to address climate change. We have to be building in adaptation with our actions. And that is fundamentally kind of the 3 for win that you have when you work with forests, because you absorb the CO2, you prevent its release, and you promote adaptation by providing habitat, by enhancing watersheds. So this suite of curves, which was produced by the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, 10 years ago, has not changed. The blue line is the worst line they envisioned we could do. We've been doing worse than that. The green line is the only so-called safe line. The only way we'll get to that safe line is through working with forests. There's a lot of talk about direct air capture. There's a lot of talk about carbon capture and sequestration. Those technologies, as and when they are developed, may well be very, very useful and needed, but we actually have direct air capture today, and we have carbon capture and storage today in our forests. They are the largest, the safest, the most expandable tool that we have. And they also, as I say, are multi-benefit with adaptation. And compared to the $8,000 a ton on CCS, these are cheap. So the next time anybody talks to you about climate change and the solutions, I want you to talk about forests. Electric cars are great. I have one myself. We all should have electric cars. We should also be conserving and, as importantly, changing how we manage forests. Because in the next 8 years, that's where we'll make the single biggest difference. And you may remember that 2 years ago, the UN said we have 10 years to make a difference. So that's kind of the view from the top about Pacific Forest Trust. We like to call ourselves a think and do organization because we work on policy, then we do direct action. We own, manage, and manage forests. We also, as I say, do conservation easements and other transactions. So that's the work on the ground. And then we do the work to make the policies, make it more effective. And with that, I'll say thank you. And I'm going to stop screen sharing and hope that there are some questions.
There are some questions. Thank you for a great presentation. The first question that I see is just how do you develop the canopy? What do you plant other than huckleberry? How tall does a tree need to be and how old?
Those are great questions. Generally speaking, the trees need to be 200 feet tall to start with. And so that's kind of a minimum. And the base of the canopy layer is the polypodium. It's the leather fern. And in fact, it grows into huge mats bigger than the room that I'm standing in. And you can imagine that you need a big, tall treetop for that. But that is the base, and it is from that soil is accumulated, water is accumulated, and other things also come. For the vaccinium, and those are the only two things that we're planting. Vaccinium needs to have a little bit of rot in the tree for it to really take root. So you have to have a tree that has lost a limb to wind, or it's had a lightning strike, or top is blown out a little bit, so that you've got a little bit of decay there. And then we enhance that little hole, and that's where the vaccinium plug goes. And then things kind of come from there, because there's so many seeds and spores in the air that once you've got the soil, because the polypodium has captured it with the water, then things evolve there on out. So we will not be doing more than the polypodium and the vaccinium. Steve Sillett likes to call polypodium the system engineer. So those of you who are also fond of beavers, you know that people in the water community call beavers the system engineer. So maybe you can kind of reverse that, flip that up in the canopy.
Great, thank you. And also, a question is, what are you doing with respect to the prevention of forest resilience?
What are we doing with regard to the prevention of forest resilience?
To respect to fire prevention, forest resilience.
Oh, okay, that's a great question. So we are huge proponents of what we like to call good fire. We do live in a fire adapted state. And even in the redwoods, there were fires every roughly 11 years, if you believe the research that's been done to date. In the redwood region, those were by and large very low intensity fires along the forest floor, run up the bark or the sides of the trees, but not damage the trees themselves. Redwoods were the asbestos forest. In other forest types that are frequent fire forests, particularly those that are more the mixed conifer, those had fire as if not more frequently, and they're incredibly important factors forming the forest. So interestingly, so our philosophy is we need to move from fighting fire to managing fire, or as one friend of mine put it, dancing with fire, because fire is not going away. So what we're doing around that is really promoting restoration to more natural forest conditions, to the kinds of forests that were adapted to fire. And that means they have many fewer stems to the acre than what we have today. But the stems to the acre are bigger and older. And with the bigger, older trees, you have much thicker bark. That bark can withstand low intensity fires. When you look back, and this is the work of people like Scott Stevens at UC Berkeley, roughly 5 million acres a year burned in the state of California. We have 100 million acres, about 15 plus million of those are snow and ice, and then add in the desert. So you had actually fires covering, you could count on it, take out the wetlands, the fires, the snow and ice area, within every decade. But with fire suppression and with how we have managed forests to try and put as many stems to the acre historically, when a fire happens and it gets out of control, it's going to be completely out of control. So what our focus is to promote the budgets that will help pay for the kinds of restoration on private lands. And the state has also done it on the federal lands, to a more natural stem density, and then to really start to use prescribed fire regularly with willing landowners and providing the insurance to do that. We've made a little bit of progress on the insurance side, because when a fire gets away, you don't want to be the landowner that your fire got away and burned another landowner's land. So having the state bear the insurance for that, increasing the number of people who are licensed to do burns that way. So we've been doing a lot to promote more natural resilience to fire so that we can have fire, but it's not damaging. That was a long answer, so hope that was.
Thank you. So complete. There is one other question kind of related and asks, are you working with local tribes to implement these concepts? Are they receptive? Do they participate?
Oh, that's also a really great question. And the answer is yes. We actually put together a coalition of people a couple of years ago with some funding from the Hewlett Foundation. We wanted to expand who was involved in the fire arena. We have worked with the Karuk and the Cultural Fire Management Council for a number of years. What we wanted to do, because Californians as a whole are not a forest people. I mean, in Arcata, you're forest people, but you're in LA, you're not forest people. You're in San Diego, you're not forest people. You don't think about forests the way that forest people do. And so you don't think about fire except as a danger. And you only think about it from time to time. So we wanted to expand the people in our legislature and the people across the state who understood that we had some joint interests in getting good fire back on the landscape. So now we have Cultural Fire Management Council, the Karuk, the Council of Economic Justice, American Lung Association, cattlemen's, vintners, in a really broad group of people getting together to talk regularly about where we share interests in promoting a concept that I like to call safe communities, safe landscapes. And that is to share the interest that if we manage our landscapes well for fire, it makes our communities much safer. And if we advocate together for the kinds of funding that is needed both in communities for things like cooling centers and safe houses when there is fire, for better air, and for safe landscapes, we'll all do better. But traditional ecological knowledge is absolutely foundational for good fire.
Thank you. Again, great. Another similar question. Ted asks, are there similar organizations in other states? Is there coordination between the states?
The similar organizations working on fire or similar organizations working on forests? Sorry?
He's muted. Let's see.
Hey,
Forest.
Tim.
Forest.
Forrest.
On forest. Well, we are pleased that there's a group called the New England Forestry Foundation that modeled themselves on us. There are land trusts obviously across the country. And we're a little unusual in that we do a lot of policy work. Most land trusts don't. There's a group called MESID in the Appalachians, which is for advocating for forests and more sustainable development that is also has a very minor land trust component. So there are certainly other land trusts in the country.
How about Washington State?
Washington is different. And the reason that Washington is different, there are certainly land trusts in Washington State. They are not particularly active in the forest management space, nor are they particularly active in the climate space. And one of the key reasons is that state funding in Washington State for conservation goes primarily to their own Department of Ecology to acquire forest land. And so it just has a different structure and composition. But there is a great coalition group in Oregon called WEC, the Washington Environmental Council, that does do terrific work in the policy arena. And it's a coalition, as its name says.
Thank you. Susan asks, are you incorporating the reintroduction of the California condor into your programs?
No, we don't. So we work from kind of from the belly button to the head of California. So from the Sierra Valley north, and we're really a little outside of the range of the condor. We are working on the reintroduction of beaver. California has a very outdated policy towards beaver. It's still considered to be a pest in the policy. And I'm happy that there is some progress happening here. But for landowners, a landowner can kill a beaver if they don't want it on their property. But if you want to, shall we say, adopt a beaver or reintroduce beaver, you can't. Only Cal Fish and Game can do it. And they don't want to because they have been concerned that then the beaver might do something that was a nuisance for another landowner. So they've really focused on these beaver dam analogs. So we haven't done anything for the condor, but we are working on the beaver.
Great. And Susan added that they're being reintroduced to Northern California, and that 4 have arrived up here recently.
Well, that's cool. We don't have any, we have not been involved in that. So good to know about, Susan, and I appreciate that. I'll something we could certainly look into.
Another question, what can we do personally with the trees on our forested land to facilitate conservation and old growth?
Oh, there's a lot you can do. It always depends on, if you've got a backyard, if you've got 10 acres, if you've got 100 acres, you've got more. So that really depends. But I'd say the simplest thing that all of us can do is always work with native plants, or make sure that that's part of the mix that we're working with, because the trees are incredibly important, but they're not the entire forest. There's also the understory, there's the herb layer, they're the meadows. And so thinking about it is, if you have the ability to let your trees get big and old, let them get big and old. The bigger and older they are, the more like a mixed use community they are, the more habitats they have, the better they are for the soil, the better they are for carbon. But not everybody has that ability. And it really depends, if you have very young forests, if you have what kind of composition that you've got. So that's a whole conversation by itself. I'm afraid I'm not going to have a really short answer for that, other than to really emphasize the value of having native species in whatever land you have.
Okay, thanks again. And then are we managing the Arcata community forest to achieve old growth conservation goals?
Yeah, I mean, some of you may remember a man named Dale Thornburg, who was at Humboldt State before it was the Humboldt Polytechnic. Dale has unfortunately been gone for what, a decade or more at this point. But Dale Thornburg is, of course, the architect of the Arcata City Forest, along with Mark Andre and a few others at the time. And Dale was our initial forester. So his concepts are guiding what is going on still in the Arcata City Forest. And you guys have about 100 years on us. So the Arcata City Forest is about 85 years older than the Van Eck Forest. But so it's inspirational to see what can happen in just decades. And, you know, what a gorgeous forest that is.
It is. There's a quick question about red alders. Are they native to our forests and should they be maintained amidst the redwoods?
Oh yeah, they're on the stream zones. They don't live that long, and they like a disturbance regime. But yes, their alder is great. There's also a question here about the leather fern on the forest floor. It blows down to the forest floor. So if you're walking in Prairie Creek or you're in one of the other old growth redwood forests, you may find these big clumps of polypodium that have blown out of the top of the forest. And in fact, how we got the starts, shall we say, for the polypodium that we've been putting back up is we got a permit from the National Park Service to collect several of those. And then we divided them and have grown them, and we're putting them up. So that's when you would find it down below.
And then do you see Karen has she says so many redwoods have been removed in and around Eureka. I wonder what the laws are regarding their removal from private property. Do you know?
Well, if it's a residential area, that's going to depend on the community rules on that. And I'm not familiar with every community's rule. So from a residential perspective, but if they are on larger than residential sized properties and they're being managed for timber, then that's governed by the California Forest Practice Act. And that is a significant body of regulation. It's one of the things about the California Forest Practice Act that is somewhat ironic, but is indicative of what I was saying in opening the talk, is that the goal of the Forest Practice Act is a sustained yield of timber. It is not to maintain the forest. And so when you think about this in today's eyes, as opposed, and it's a landmark law, it's one of the best in the country, but everything that is in there that is not about timber is a constraint to timber harvest, but timber harvest, sustained timber harvest is the goal. So it's a Forest Practice Act to restrain financial activity on the landscape, but it is not to promote what we want on the landscape, which is these functioning forests. So that's an area that we are starting to put more time and attention into, because we can't simply rely on the timber industry to sustain our forests. We have to have structured it so that we're really partnering with them and they're not driven to focus on timber quite so much in the short term.
Another question, what can we do to facilitate your work? Are there local initiatives we can join up with? And what about policy initiatives?
Well, that's a great question. Number one, you have some pretty fabulous federal and state representatives that you can encourage to do the right thing. And they're inclined to do the right thing anyway. Mr. Huffman is one of the best, and Mr. McGuire and Mr. Woods are both excellent in the state. But sometimes they have so much on their plate that they may not know about some of the forest initiatives that are important to you as their constituents. So if you just sign up with us for our newsletter or contact them, we can let you know about when we're working with them. So for example, on this Trinity Headwaters project, we're asking Mr. Huffman to make this one of his earmark requests. And of course, he'll have a lot of earmark requests. They're all important. But we think that conserving almost 10% of the Upper Trinity watershed is incredibly important, and it'll be, incredibly important for the future for so much. So there are things like that. If you sign up with us, which I think on the last slide, or I can send it over to Jane or to you, just how to sign up on our newsletter, and then we'll let you know of things. We really appreciate the help. And of course, if you'd love to make, don't forget us, it's tax time. If you want to make a donation, we would happily accept that too. Obviously, you have many, many fabulous nonprofits in the Humboldt area, but if you have an interest, we certainly welcome the support.
I see that Karen also put in the chat the native plants that the Native Plant Society is having their annual sale on April 30th and May 1st. So and she put the link to the organization website there. So if the folks are interested in picking up some native plants, there's a nice sale happening soon. So to share that. I see Jane on. I'm wondering if I don't see any more questions in the chat, so I'll let you go ahead, Jane.
All right. Laurie, thank you so much for sharing with us. We are delighted to have you give us all these insights. I would love to be able to see what a leather fern looks like and see whether there are any in the Arcata community forest that I can see. There's at least one species I haven't recognized yet. So at least. But meanwhile, thanks everybody for coming. And we want to let you know that on April 11th, we will be speaking about the Humboldt Senior Resource Center's new behavioral health service with Samantha Day. The new behavioral health service program at HSRC provides counseling designed specifically to meet the needs of older adults. Please join us to explore how this holistic program focuses on the social, physical, and emotional aspects of mental health for adults aged 55 and older, and I guess that includes us. So we are delighted to have you all here. Hope to see you next week. And Laurie, good luck with all your initiatives. And if there's something we should be trying to promote locally, please let us know.
We will do that. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
Laurie, do look at all the nice comments in the chat. Lots of people thanking you for the important work that you're doing. So do recognize it, and thank you so much. And Jane, Karen says that leather ferns are for sale at the native plant sale. So there you go. All right, thanks again, everybody.
Have a great day. Enjoy the rain. We have at least an inch already.
Thank you, Jane. Thank